Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar by WaterAid and Sida. My name is Martina Nea, and I am Equality and Inclusion Advisor at WaterAid, and I will be moderating this webinar, where we aim to go beyond catchwords and really talk about how to strengthen systems that deliver lasting benefits for everyone. And we have a lot of interesting speakers lined up for you today, and we really hope that you will enjoy this session. Perhaps you'll learn something, perhaps you'll even be a little bit inspired. What do I know? One thing I do know is that we as development partners all strive to have a positive change and to contribute to a positive societal change. And for that change to be sustainable, strong systems are fundamental, and strong systems that work for the needs and the rights for people. And when we say systems, what do we mean? Well, we mean all the institutions, the authorities, the policies and the processes, the resources and finances, but also all the people, the behaviors and the interactions that together can ensure the delivery of human rights. And this can be water and sanitation systems, it can be health systems or education systems, and many others. And even though systems might sound very technical, unless efforts are people-centered and rights-based, it is likely that inequalities will continue to prevail. And having a strong voice, a strong public voice, is key for a bottom-up driver for sustainable change. And we have a lot of organizations here today that will present different aspects of this to you. And we all believe that by strengthening systems, we can achieve sustainable and inclusive reductions in poverty, but also we can see improvements in health and in quality of life, and the universal realization of human rights. And the COVID pandemic has made it even more evident that any response can only be as efficient as any existing system allows. And this has, of course, now been obvious in the healthcare system and in the water and sanitation system, but also applies to any other sector in society. And what brought us here today to this webinar is the launch of WaterAid's new report. It's a report on system strengthening work and what we have learned from that work. It shares our experiences and learnings from our biggest system strengthening program. It's a global program named SASWASH, funded by the H&M Foundation. And a summary of these learnings will be presented here today by my colleagues Hannah Crichton-Smith and Cesar Kimbugwe from WaterAid. And we will also have the opportunity to learn about how democracy can be strengthened through a systems thinking from Marcus Carson at the ICLD. And we'll also get the opportunity to hear more about how health systems can be strengthened, and examples from INS in Mozambique with Dr. Edna Viegas. And after having listened to these very exciting presentations today, we will have a conversation with Maria Bystedt from H&M Foundation and Elizabeth Montgomery from Sida. And we'll talk a little bit around why and how donors can support system strengthening programs. And throughout the presentations, if you find that you want to ask any of the speakers a question, you can go to a separate website, which is called menti.com, and you enter the code 6861776, and there you will be able to submit your question. The questions will be picked up in the end and addressed to the speakers. So please remember to write with your question who you want which one of the speakers you want should respond to your question. So, before we head into the details and the nitty-gritty of systems strengthening, I want to invite Stefan Svartling Petersen to set the scene for us. Stefan is a professor in global health at Uppsala University and also former global head of health at UNICEF. So, welcome, Stefan, and I hand over the word to you.
Thanks, Martina, and good morning. I'm extremely excited already. This is a fantastic opportunity. You know, I spent the last 4.5 years as Chief of Health globally for UNICEF, and I was thinking a lot about health issues. And one of the big ones is that we lose 2.5 million newborn babies every year in the first month of life, and we lose 300,000 women in childbirth. And one of the main strategies we push from a health perspective is to get women to come and deliver in hospitals and with a midwife. But as it turns out, in 4 out of 10 health facilities in the world, the midwife can't wash her hands before she delivers you. So obviously, going at this from a health side alone without getting the midwife being able to wash her hands, we're clearly missing the point. That's sort of exhibit 1. Exhibit 2 I wanted to bring is also a health example. You can also get high blood pressure during pregnancy and during delivery. It's very dangerous for you as a mother and for the baby. It's called eclampsia. And my friend, she was busy in a hospital working on how to fix the drugs and the treatment protocol, because there was this woman here with high blood pressure in labor and all of those. Everything was very dramatic. And then she said, but what are those women doing over in the corner? Oh, they're defecating. It turned out the very same hospital where my friend was trying to fix a very advanced treatment with drugs, there was no toilet. So the women were defecating in the delivery room for lack of the toilet. Arguably, the most important thing you can do also for health is to send a girl to school. And even sending boys to school is excellent. Unfortunately, COVID has thrown a big spanner in that works. 600 million kids are still having their primary schools closed in the world. It used to be 1.6 billion, but 600 million still don't have a school to go to. And lo and behold, one of the big problems of getting them back to school is that 4 out of 10 schools in the world don't have soap and water. And we're all manically washing our hands now, right? And we know what to do in COVID times. But it's hard to open a school again and argue you can open a school safely if there's no soap and water in that school. And that's the reality in 4 out of 10 schools in the world today. In 4 out of 10 schools in the world, there is also no toilet, which means that even when the school is open, once a month, girls, when they're menstruating, typically don't go to school because there's no toilet. So clearly, we need to work together across health, education, and WASH. We need each other if we want to make an impact. It's very evident from a health perspective, and I think it goes the other way as well. But as we've learned, from UNICEF, from WaterAid, from others, it's not enough just to put a pump in the village. It's not enough just to put a latrine, because they break down, they may go unused. To paraphrase the African proverb, it takes a system to actually approach this. We need a whole WASH system, and that's why I think this is such an exciting program that you're embarking on here and that we'll hear about today. Because in health, we talk about health systems. And many of my master's students from Uppsala University are actually on today listening, because we are talking about health systems and health system strengthening. Similarly, in the education field, we talk about education systems and education system strengthening. And today it's the WASH system. It's going beyond the pump to all the things you described, Martina, and seeing how we can work together. So I'm extremely excited for today to be learning together with all of you and seeing what can I take home to health systems from WASH systems. Because as you rightly said, Martina, it is also quite an abstract concept, a system, all of these things. And how do you know whether you're making a difference? Those are some of the things that I've picked out of your report, and I think we'll be able to look at today. What is a WASH system? How do you know if you're making a difference? And what are we learning here? And how can we work better together? So I'm all set for a very exciting morning here of learning. So back to you, Martina.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you for setting the scene for us and also making those connections between the different sectors and the different systems of health, water and sanitation, and education. And of course, there are other systems as well, but thank you so much for giving those practical examples and bringing the situation of people to us here today so that we can also remember who is it that we're actually working for. It's not the systems in itself, but the people, of course. So thank you so much for that, Stefan. So we now have 4 presentations lined up for you today that will go through different examples and share their learnings from working with system strengthening. First out is my colleague Hannah Crichton-Smith. Hannah is WASH advisor at WaterAid and also the Global Learning Manager of WaterAid's Global System Strengthening Program, SASWASH. Hannah will present to you WaterAid's approach to system strengthening and give you an overview of what the WASH system looks like. Hannah, you are welcome to take the microphone, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Martina, and thanks, Stefan, for that great overview as well. I will just share my slides. Hopefully. Hopefully you can all see these slides. Give me a nod if you can. Yes. Great, thank you. So I'll just, as Martina says, I'll just spend the next few minutes giving a brief overview of system strengthening from the water, sanitation and hygiene perspective. And as Martina says, this presentation draws on our new learning report from the SASWASH program, System Strengthening for Inclusive Lasting WASH, that transforms people's lives, before my colleague Sida from WaterAid Uganda will go into more practical examples of how this way of working and thinking has been applied in practice. And just briefly, on the SASWASH program. So the SASWASH program is a 5-year initiative being implemented in Cambodia, Ethiopia, Uganda and Pakistan. And it's really trying to unblock the systemic barriers to WASH sustainability, inclusion and scalability. It has 5 outcome areas that all link to different parts of the WASH system, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail later. And it has a global learning function that facilitates learning exchange across the 4 countries involved, the wider WaterAid Federation and the global WASH sector. And of course, it's funded by the H&M Foundation. So before we dive into the detail, we thought it would be useful to just provide a couple of definitions about, for WaterAid, what the WASH system means and what system strengthening means. So for WaterAid, it's really, as Martina says, the people, the behaviours, the policies, the processes, the resources, the interactions and the institutions necessary for delivering inclusive, lasting WASH for everyone at scale. And system strengthening is really about understanding that these systems are complex, there are many different parts, they sit within broader social, economic, political and environmental contexts, and that they need to, these barriers and blockages within the system need to be understood to then work to addressing them. So where did system strengthening come from in the WASH sector? Well, it's come from a place of, and a recognition within the WASH sector that we're off track to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 6. And of course, we all know that that's clean water and sanitation for everyone. not just WaterAid's off track, but the whole WASH sector. And this means that people are persistently left out due to issues of marginalisation, persistent inequalities in access, and not being able to reach the scale of WASH services adequately. Tied to the issue of being off track is a significant sustainability crisis within the WASH sector. This is well known, it's been documented since the 1970s, and it persists despite changing methods of WASH delivery, different modes of development work within the WASH sector, and it spans water and sanitation and hygiene. And these are just some statistics that you can see here of water supply failure. And it threatens the future of investment in WASH if we can't demonstrate that we're delivering and achieving the results that we expect and hope to see. So there are 4 interlinked challenges that really underpin why we're talking about system strengthening in the WASH sector. And those really are boiled down to sustainability, persistent challenges of social exclusion and marginalisation, inability to achieve scale with some of the methods that we're applying, and tied to all of that is not enough prioritisation of learning about what works, what doesn't, and how we adapt to and improve what we're doing based on previous experience and lessons learned. So that's really the background to system strengthening and the SUSWASH programme. So what do we mean by the WASH system in a bit more detail? As Martina says, really the people are at the centre of what we're trying to achieve, particularly most marginalised people, the ones who are persistently left out due to issues of marginalisation. And really, it's those people who we're aiming to ensure that their rights to water and sanitation are realised. Now, to achieve this, it's not just enough, as Stefan has mentioned, to just build taps and toilets to ensure that those services last beyond the initial project and reach the most marginalised people. There are a number of different actors that work around that WASH project and those WASH services, and these are just some of those listed here. So for example, local government, regulators, civil society, that all have a role to play in the delivery of those WASH services. There are also a number of factors such as financing, monitoring, planning, that all have a part to play again in the delivery and sustainability of those WASH services. And all of these factors and actors interact, there's relationships between them, there's power relations between them that influence and dictate whether or not those WASH services will reach everyone and will last. So there's very blockages in the system that the aim of WASH system strengthening would be to unblock and address as a means of ensuring that those WASH services last. And some of those blockages can be inadequate finance, persistent inequalities, low political prioritisation, big issues around climate change. So we're really talking about the whole ecosystem around WASH. And obviously the blue haze you can see here is really looking at, as an NGO like WaterAid, what level of influence do we have to bring about change in the system? Because obviously we have to work in partnership to unblock some of these barriers as well. We can't do this alone. So as Stefan's already mentioned, the health system and the education system overlap with the WASH system, and it requires good collaboration and close partnerships with our colleagues in the health and education systems, particularly when we're working in healthcare facilities and schools. So system strengthening can be boiled down to the actors, the factors, and the relationships between them, the whole ecosystem. It requires working at multiple levels, and within SUSWASH we've done this. Really we're looking at local government level, what barriers exist at the district level, but also looking at barriers that might exist in national policy or regional policy or provincial policy or regulation that may need reform and support implementing those reforms back at the local level. And we also play a role in global level learning and advocacy functions at the global level. And as we've already mentioned a little bit, the WASH system is very complex. It's not linear. It's quite difficult to understand how change is happening and where efforts should be targeted. So it requires a detailed and continuous analysis of the initial context, the strength of the WASH system, to inform what you're doing, to analyze as you go, to reflect on what's working, to share lessons, and then also to adapt what you're doing as changes in the context arrive. So designing the WASH system, designing a system strengthening program is needed at the start. And one way of doing that is breaking the WASH system down using building blocks. So sometimes you might hear, and I think Stefan's already mentioned, the health sector uses World Health Organization building blocks, and the WASH sector is no different. It has a number of different frameworks that have WASH system building blocks. And this diagram here is WaterAid's interpretation and conceptualization of what those building blocks might be. And that helps to break down some of that complexity to then design your intervention. We've also used building blocks within the SUSWASH program to measure change, to really try and identify how we're bringing about change within those building blocks and understand whether we're on track to achieve our outcomes. So some of those things, and Sida will talk in more detail, would be around government leadership, increased financing for WASH, strong plans that are based on full life cycle costs, for example. Some of our achievements to date, it's important that we obviously reach people with water and sanitation, but some of these people have been reached as a result of our broader efforts to strengthen the WASH system. So with regards to improving government decision making based on up-to-date data has helped them to inform where they should direct investment in WASH, and that has indirectly resulted in people gaining access to WASH services. So what we've learned is really around our ways of working. What does it take for an NGO like WaterAid to deliver a system strengthening way of working? It requires time for ongoing analysis, close alignment with government, really focused on adaptive management and continuous learning, collaborating with practice and policy colleagues, close partnerships with other sectors and other stakeholders outside the WASH sector, a long-term commitment to funding and to a geographical focus area, and a diverse skill set. It's not enough to just have engineering skills, for example, when you're working in this way. So we have a number of next steps, which I might skip over because I think I'm running out of time. But just some takeaway messages would be that this way of working requires flexible budgets and a flexible outlook on the behalves of the agency and the donors, resources and budget for the analysis and learning and adaptive management, that long-term commitment and extended timelines because system change takes a long time, and a recognition that it's cost effectiveness in the sense that it's more expensive in some ways to deliver WASH services that may fail after a few months. It's more cost effective to strengthen the systems around those WASH services than to install expensive WASH services that may fail a few months later. So if you are interested in hearing more, obviously Sida, my colleague, will present next, but there are 2 sessions next week where we'll go into more detail and have insights from the 3 other countries as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That gave us a really good overview of the WASH system, the building blocks, and the way that WaterAid is working to strengthen that. So thank you so much for those insights and learnings from WaterAid. And if you have a question for Hannah, please go to menti.com and enter the code 6861776. And there you can submit your question to Hannah. And as Hannah said, the SDG 6 is definitely behind on reaching its targets. And we also know that this has implications for other SDGs, such as SDG 1 on ending poverty, but also SDG 2 on ending hunger. We know that 50% of all the cases of malnutrition among children are due to contaminated water and lack of hygiene. And also SDG 3, health. Still, like Stefan said, that we still have many, many healthcare facilities. Actually, around half of all the healthcare facilities in low and middle income countries lack access to clean and safe water. And since the lack of access to water and sanitation disproportionately affects women, we will never reach target number 5 of gender equality if we do not meet the targets of access to water and sanitation in SDG number 6. So taking a systems perspective to this and working collaboratively over the different sectors and the different systems is definitely fundamental to achieving the Agenda 2030. And we will hear a little bit more now on what that could look like in detail in a project in Uganda. We will hear from my colleague Sida Kimbugwe, who is the SASWASH program manager in Uganda with WaterAid. He will share the learnings from implementing a project on system strengthening. Cesar, over to you.
Good morning, colleagues. I'm very happy to be sharing our practical examples from Uganda implementing the SASWASH program. My name is Sida Kimbugwe. I manage the SASWASH program in Uganda. Next slide. So the SASWASH program in Uganda is implemented in Kampala, and that is part of the greater Kampala metropolitan area, where we also have 2 of the peri-urban municipalities, which in the Sabagabo. The choice of the greater Kampala metropolitan area for this program was informed by the demographic statistics, where you have a high number of people and many urban areas increasing. We stand at about 5.4 in terms of population growth. And of course, the city Kampala was planned for a daytime population stands at 5 million people. So definitely the WASH services are overstretched, and that brings about the need for joint planning. How do you work with the peri-urban municipalities around Kampala to cause joint planning and be able to ensure that these services are provided, but also ensure that some of the population that comes to the city during the day can stay where they are. So that causes the need for cities and peri-urban areas to do joint planning. And that's why we chose the greater Kampala metropolitan area for this kind of interventions. For the operational level, in terms of delivery of the program, we implement in communities, and these are main informal settlements. And we also implement the program in public institutions. These are schools and health facilities that are funded by government. In terms of comparison, usually in Uganda, public institutions are less facilitated compared to the ones that are funded by the private sector or private actors. But at the national level, we also work collaboratively with line ministries of water, health, and education. And like the previous speaker said, you cannot deliver a WASH system strengthening program without having to work with the other sectors. Next slide. So like Hannah said, our focus in Uganda is largely in 5 building blocks of the systems, and that is government leadership, service delivery, accountability, as well as active and empowered citizens and coordination. But of course, you realize that all these building blocks of the system are related. So you cannot deliver on one and forget the other. So we also have light touch engagements around monitoring, strategic planning, financing, gender, as well as institutional arrangements. And of course, for instance, if I can share some live examples about that, we've been working collaboratively with communities on empowering them to be able to demand for wash services, and that is intended to sustain what the interventions of the project are, because at the end of the day, they will be the ones to continuously engage with their leaders. But at the same time, as we do that, we ensure that on the other side of supply, we collaboratively engage with government to be able to respond to the demands of these citizens. And then the aspect of monitoring is very important as you deliver on the building block of service delivery, capturing the numbers. How can policy and decision making be informed by statistics? Where is the gap in terms of service improvement? So all these are what we call a more comprehensive system that should deliver inclusive and lasting wash. Next slide. I think I've gone through that. Yeah. So specifically, what have we been doing? I want to go into some of the practical experiences we've gone through in Uganda over the last 3 years. So we've been able to work with others, mainly Kampala Capital City Authority, to form a mayor's forum for WASH within the Greater Kampala metropolitan area. And this is majorly meant to strengthen political commitment and ensure accountability for WASH. Increasingly, we are seeing that most of these peri-urban municipalities have are challenged by the demographic statistics that I shared, and they need to learn from each other. They need mentorship. They need to raise resources together. They need to have joint plans because of those challenges that are shared together. Issues to do with fecal sludge management. We only have treatment centers in Kampala, but all the fecal sludge that is generated by the peri-urban municipalities is treated and ends up in Kampala. So how does Kampala as a city collaboratively work with the other peri-urban municipalities and be able to address some of those challenges? And we've seen that through the Mayor's Forum, one of the peri-urban municipalities, Machinge Sabaga, has been able to raise resources worth over 5 million euros issues of solid waste management. And that mentorship has come because of the platform that we've shared through the Mayor's Forum, with them learning from Kampala. We've also been able to demonstrate inclusive waste service delivery and management arrangements in 10 schools and 2 health facilities. And our role as Water Aid really is to come up with innovations that are inclusive. We also provide service level improvement, and we want government to take this to scale. So we want them to see what works and how can they take this to other schools or institutions and communities and be able to life cycle costing with domestic planning and management they've come up with WASH investment plans because using that approach, and they're now able to come up with alternative budgets beyond what government is providing for these public institutions, and they're able to finance operation and maintenance of these WASH facilities. Because you can imagine most of these schools, some of them have never had a waterborne toilet. So if you want to improve their sanitation and you take a waterborne toilet to such a school, you might be solving a problem, but you could also be creating another problem for them in terms of paying for water bills. So they need such systems arrangements in terms of capacity for planning and budgeting to be able to raise resources to maintain such a service. We've also been able to empower citizens to hold their leaders to account in terms of observing their WASH rights, but also promoting sanitation and hygiene in their communities as their role and responsibility. So we've created these groups, but where we found them, we've worked with those existing groups and introduced the aspect of accountability and monitoring. So they are able to track budgets for WASH, they visit public schools and institutions, they interact with their administrators and hold them to account in terms of ensuring that there's value for money for even the little resources that government provides to these public institutions. And then we've also seen that for us to strengthen the system, we need to work with the broader scope of the stakeholders. All the actors need to come to the same table to be able to address these issues. So we've worked with the private sector, we've worked with NGOs, and line ministries of water and environment to address and have continuous conversations on how to improve water, sanitation, and hygiene. Because it is not a problem for the water sector, but we've also had this a problem for education and the health sector. So we created platforms for those continuous conversations to happen and create the change that we desire. Next slide. In terms of the changes we are seeing on ground, one of the things we've done in schools, like Stefan said, we've seen that there's a policy in Kampala and I think in many urban cities around the world that we are transitioning from using pit latrines for sanitation to waterborne toilets. But then the schools have struggled really to catch up with the bills, the demand for water. And now with increased hand washing because of COVID, we'll increasingly see this challenge. So what we've done, we've come up with a toilet design model that is inclusive and reduces the amount of water usage. I think that could be discussed in detail later, but that has enabled schools, even those that did not have waterborne toilets, to be able to afford this kind of girls. And also it has an incinerator that provides more privacy to the girls' wing for them to change when they're having their menstruation. Before, in the previous interventions, we used to have buckets in the girls' toilets, but then we saw the girls were not using them because of some cultural taboos. Again, they used sanitary materials, ended up in the toilet and blocking the drainage system. So that was really, really challenging. Again, with the mayors, we've seen that they are taking leadership as political leaders in most of the interventions. We've given them the front seat. We've told them this is the role of government and they need to be seen taking leadership in all the interventions. So they've been very fundamental in passing the sewage and fecal sludge management legislation. It's an ordinance at the city level in Kampala, which provides the private sector a key role in providing fecal sludge management services that are pro-poor, especially targeting the informal settlements. But because of the continuous conversations they're having around system strengthening, they are also beginning to provide budgets for them to convene their constituencies through discussions, how they can help their communities in terms of providing sanitation and hygiene services. In terms of citizen strengthening and engagement, as well as empowerment, we're seeing that the communities we are working with, they've been able to continuously track budgets. They're more empowered. They've been able to continuously hold discussions. We call them barazas, but they're also not forgetting their core roles and responsibilities on sanitation and hygiene promotion. So they are holding their leaders to account, their landlords. We have in most of these informal settlements, landlords who do not provide toilets for their tenants because they prefer to have condominiums that are rented and they cannot even afford to break one to provide a toilet. So these shared toilets do not exist in some of these communities. So we've worked with this structure of community leaders, volunteers, for them to be able to engage their landlords. They use existing bylaws and city legislations to hold them to account. Some of them have been reported to courts of law and they've responded in terms of providing these services to their tenants. Next slide. So what have we learned so far? In as much as there are a couple of building blocks that we're engaging with, we've seen that government leadership is a key entry point to unlocking all the other blockages in other building blocks, at least in the context of Uganda. We've increasingly been seeing the technical wing of government and the political wing of government, especially in local governments, not working together. Of course, there are power dynamics there. And how do you have the political wing consistently taking leadership and working in coordination with the technical wings of government? So we've used that as an entry point and strengthened that particular building block to have a knock-on effect on the other building blocks. It could be a different case in other countries, but in the context of Uganda, we've used that to our strength, and we are seeing that we are other changes happening in the other building blocks. We are seeing that management and sustainability, there are also immediate pressing needs in terms of service provision. So designing an intervention that combines both system strengthening and aspects of service delivery that could be tested and scaled up by government is critical. It wouldn't be good enough in a developing country context like Uganda or other countries across Africa and the other continents for you to only focus on system strengthening without having to demonstrate how some of these building blocks work, and also responding to these immediate needs in terms of water, sanitation, and hygiene. Then the last one is around the robust integration needs in terms of working with different line ministries. The conversations you're having do not only require that you work with the line Ministry of Water and Sanitation. Government needs to deliver a sector-wide program that can be funded robustly in terms of budget allocations, and that needs to come out when you're having conversations within one sector, we're engaging all these different sectors, and that makes sense in terms of achieving the broader development targets of government. Next slide. I think that should be my last slide. I want to thank you for listening, and I welcome any questions from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cesar. And even though the internet connection between Sweden and Uganda didn't support having a video of you while speaking, we're very happy that the line was stable enough so that we could hear your whole presentation. Thank you so much for that. It was a great case to learn about how we can use and demonstrate sustainable and inclusive delivery of human rights, and then use that to build capacity in government and strengthen the system so that this can then be taken to scales. And strengthening citizens to demand their right is also part of system strengthening. But then, like you have done in Uganda, to then go in from the other side and also support government so that they actually have capacity to meet the demands of people and the rights of the people. So this was, of course, an example of water and sanitation, but this could also be applied to any system. And we're going to look a little bit more into that right now. And first we will hear from Marcus Carson. Marcus is an associate professor of sociology. He's now a senior advisor for the International Center for Local Democracy, and also a senior researcher fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute. These are all very big and serious titles, but don't be fooled, because I know that Marcus has a long history as a troublemaker, having spent 2 decades of working with low-income people's grassroots organizations, facilitating change. So Marcus is with us now at this webinar, and hopefully he'll share some of that troublemaker mindset with us. Marcus, over to you.
Great, thanks, Martina, and thanks a lot for the invitation to join the seminar here. Really interesting and important stuff that you're working on. I could say just real quickly with the introduction, you could think, God, can't this guy stay focused on something with these different organizations and different kinds of work? But I would say the advantage of having many years of work experience is that you actually get enough time to really learn these different things and then to see how they link together. So what I'd like to focus on is a little bit what Cesar just pointed out about empowered citizen groups and the importance of the social organization within this. And let me start off here with some key points. This could get a little bit wonky, so if you'll bear with me, I'm going to try to tie this to concrete examples. But when I have this label social X systems, but one of the things you see with systems thinking is that we talk about social ecological systems or social technical systems or all sorts of social related systems, but it's the social that's the center of that. And that's the key element that's important. And that system structure has its complexities. It's multi-dimensional. The second item is that the understanding system change and being able to look back and see to what extent we were able to succeed with that requires a fairly detailed picture of what the starting point looked like. We're learning more and more as we go that meaningful participation strengthens outcomes and is essential to sustainability. And in fact, the ICLD's core mission is to tackle poverty by tackling the idea is that poverty isn't just a lack of resources, it's a lack of influence over one's living conditions. And so ICLD's path to tackling poverty is to boost this local democratic engagement as a way to help people develop for themselves the tools to engage and to steer the impacts, the conditions that affect their lives. Project success and capacity development are related, but they're actually different in important ways. And the last point is that we talk a lot about roadmaps for change, but there are no roadmaps to the future. We need to think in terms of adaptive approaches. So let me give just a quick example here of this sort of social X system. Here we have an example of a social technical system. And I think one of the real challenges is that because we feel like we intuitively understand the human side, we tend to shift very quickly over to the technical parts and focus our attention on the technical without thinking about, in this case, the driver of this big machine. And the social part has quite a few complexities that were listed out both by Hannah and by Cesar that are especially important. So here's another example of a social technical system. This is labeled on the web as a motorcycle gang from Kenya. You could think there are some unusual characteristics of this motorcycle gang. One is that it's women. But if you think about the motorcycle gang as a social technical system, you think the motorcycles or the vehicles on one side. But on the social side, you have the different kind of power relationships, friendships, teacher kind of student relationships, all of these kinds of complexities that make for that system. And you have relationships within the gang, and then you have relationships to outsiders. And those are really the elements that we need to engage with in order to get lasting change. So these systems can be broken down into specific elements. And I spent a lot of years working with these low-income people's organizations and mostly around empowerment questions. And one of the things you learn is that there are different kinds of structures. One of the key distinctions in the social sciences is distinction between agents, actors, and structure, between people's capacity to take action and the structures that we work with. And people are in the center, but one of those structures is the way we see the world, the way we filter in or out information, how we define problems, how we perceive our options and not. And the second is this question of institutions, policies, rules, and the third is the relationships, power, friendships, trust relationships, the kind of networks and constellations that guide how we interact, and also the kinds of constellations that might support changes or might even oppose them. So those are especially important, and what's useful about this kind of a structure is that even though these relate to one another, they work differently, and they change in a sort of asynchronously. They don't change all at the same time. But if we're able to divide up the system structure into these different elements, it's easier to analyze and see. Sometimes you start with a change in rules, a change in institutions, and that leads to a change in behavior. But other times we find that it's much more successful to tackle this change in how people see the world, and that leads to rule changes. So they don't necessarily come in the same sequence all the time. Another of the elements that's hard to keep in mind is that these are multi-scalar, and so when we work at the local level, that local level work is obviously influenced by national regulations, national conditions, funding flows. So in some sense it can create the conditions for success or obstacles to success at the local level. And at the same time, an organization like ICLD is interested in having societal level impacts, even though we work at the local level. And so we need to think in terms of what does big change look like? How do we do changes at a local level that are able to be picked up as examples in other places, or implemented in some sense at a higher scale, at a regional or national scale. ICLD right now is working with revamping. We're working to revamp our model of change, our model of how we engage. And one of the things that we see here is at the beginning, the middle, and the end of our programs, there are different kinds of needs, and in particular, in the role that I was in with the Knowledge Center, different kinds of knowledge needs. So one of those knowledge needs is sort of analysis of the starting points. What are the power relationships? What are the rules and regulations? How do people see the world? And what are the social relationships that might facilitate change or might obstruct those kinds of changes? As you come into the implementation phase, the needs change. There are very few programs or projects that we do that are starting from scratch, that have never been done before. So that opens up opportunities to do what we would call action research, which is really sort of research-based problem solving, to identify whether others have done similar work that can be learned from, or whether there are other specific kinds of problems, whether those are technical or social, to be able to do this kind of problem solving as you go. So in our case, research isn't this arm's length process. We're thinking much more in terms of engaging. And then the third is the conclusion, where we're actually through the entire process, where we're looking at to what extent we've had an impact, and whether the changes that have occurred are things that we have planned in advance, or whether we've actually gotten changes that we might not have expected. I'm going to jump ahead to this last point about roadmaps, because I think it's a pretty common challenge in our work, and that is that we often think that once we've set up a plan, that we follow that plan, or we follow that roadmap, and we come to the end and get the change that we were looking at. But roadmaps are really the wrong metaphor, I think. It's much more a chessboard or something similar to that, because each move, each change that's accomplished changes the layout on the chessboard. And it means we need to stop, reevaluate. Maybe we don't need to stop, but we need to reevaluate where we're at and what the next moves have to be. So it's constantly moving. And this requires this sort of adaptive approach that Martina and Hannah have referred to, where we're constantly reassessing where we're at and which areas we need to engage with. So thank you for that, and I'll look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for helping us link the theory with practice and with those insights. And thank you for highlighting the much need of focusing on people in the system strengthening work. And as we've said before, and as also Marcus requested now, don't forget to submit your questions on menti.com with the code 6861776. Adaptive management, research, and analysis are themes that all of the speakers are coming back to. It's a way of addressing problems that require us to stop and reflect Are our activities taking us where we want to go? Or have we learned something that opens up new pathways that might be more effective to change? And that might not have been in our log frames or our plans from the beginning. As actors working on system strengthening, we constantly learn. But we also need to use that learning to capacitate others in the system. The Swedish Public Health Agency of Sweden has a long-standing cooperation with the National Health Institute in Mozambique. Today we will hear from Dr. Edna Viegas about their collaboration, and she will give us an example of capacity building as one of the components of system strengthening. Dr. Edna Viegas holds a degree in human medicine and a PhD in medical science from Karolinska Institute. She is the head of the National Health Institute's provincial office in Maputo, Mozambique, and holds the responsibilities for all the institute's research and surveillance activities in the Maputo area. So we look forward to hearing from you, Edna. Welcome very much, and I hand over the word to you.
Thank you, Martina. Do we have the slides up? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Can I have the first slide, please? Okay, thank you very much. Hi, it's a pleasure to be here today, even though virtually, and to talk a little bit about the research capacity development in Mozambique. I was asked to focus my presentation on the collaboration between the Public Health Agency of Sweden and INS, which stands for the National Institute of Health of Mozambique, and to explain a little bit how this collaboration has contributed to strengthen the health research environment in the country, which is in fact very important because research brings a solution to public health problems. So next slide, please. I will start by explaining who we are and what we do in Mozambique. So INS is an autonomous government institution. Our mission in Mozambique is to generate and promote the incorporation of scientific and technological solutions to the major health issues in the country. And we are overall responsible for the conduct of health research, as well as surveillance, training, and other public health activities. Particularly, we are responsible for the public health laboratories in the country. Next slide, please. The collaboration between the Public Health Agency of Sweden and INS began maybe a bit more than 10 years ago, and it has been traditionally focused on HIV research. At the time we established this collaboration, Sweden had developed an HIV vaccine candidate that was about to enter clinical evaluation. And Tanzania and Mozambique had a growing HIV epidemic at the time. So since Sweden already had a long-standing collaboration with our neighbors, Tanzania, the collaboration with Mozambique almost came naturally. Next slide, please. So the aim of this collaboration was based the overall aim was to develop local capacity to perform HIV vaccine trials locally. And this collaboration was based in four main pillars. The first one was to develop clinic capacity, and this included the establishment of a research site that was able to run HIV vaccine trials in the country. The second pillar was focused on laboratory capacity, and this was really to develop the local capacity to perform immunological assays that could respond to these vaccine studies that were planned to be conducted in country. And then the third and fourth pillars were focused on training of local scientists and support the local governments and local institutions to establish South-to-South collaborations. So I will now talk a little bit about all of these 4 pillars and how this collaboration has contributed not only for the successful conduct of these HIV vaccine trials in country, but also for the development of research capacity overall at INS and in Mozambique. So next slide. I will start by talking about the first pillar, which is clinical capacity. When we started this collaboration with the Public Health Agency in Sweden back in 2008, there was very little research being done at INS and overall in Mozambique. Since we had very little knowledge, we started by implementing small studies. We started with an HIV cohort study that we have implemented at the referral hospital in Maputo City, which is the capital of Mozambique. But 2 years after we started this collaboration, and with the support of the Public Health Agency of Sweden, we were able to establish CISPOC. CISPOC stands for Palana-Caniço Health Research and Training Center. And this is the youngest site of the National Institute of Health of Mozambique. We have 2 additional sites, as you can see on the map, one in the central region of the country and another one also in the southern region. So CISPOC is actually the youngest research site, but is now, 9 years after we have established the site, CISPOC is now one of the most prominent research centers in the country and has also gained international visibility. CISPOC has today 147 employees, and CISPOC is not only a young site because it's only established 9 years ago, but also because of the people that work at the site. The majority of people that work at CISPOC are under the age of 35, so we are all very young. Since we established the site and this initial collaboration until today, we were able to have more than 50 research projects that are either concluded, are ongoing, or are under preparation. And we have also had the opportunity to develop a very strong community outreach team and a very strong community advisory board. So the links with the community were very important for the success of this research center. Over the years, we established CISPOC as a platform for training of graduate and postgraduate students in Mozambique. So CISPOC, with the experience that has gained over the years, now serves as a platform for development of thesis for these students. Next slide, please. Our research capacity has expanded over the last years, and we started with 1 floor on the building that you see on your left side, which is, like what I would call CISPOC headquarters. But then in 2014 and 2015, we added 2 satellite sites in 2 hospitals in the Maputo City area and in the Maputo province area. And these 2 sites are focused on tuberculosis research, which is one of the main public health concerns in Mozambique. Next slide, please. I brought here a few pictures of CISPOC headquarters, and this is where everything began. We at CISPOC, I'm not going to talk about the satellite units, but just to give you an idea of what we have at CISPOC, we have 5 medical rooms, 2 counseling rooms, 3 fully operational on-site laboratories, meeting rooms that are used for training of staff and for big meetings, etc. So we can go to the next slide. Now I'm going to move to the second pillar, which is development of laboratory capacity. And what I will explain is how this actually occurred. So with the support of public health, the Public Health Agency of Sweden, we were able to train local staff to perform all these immunological assays. They were also trained in international standards for laboratories, and they got support to develop local standard operational procedures. But we also got support in terms of equipment to be able to perform these kinds of assays. When we started the first HIV vaccine trial, we didn't have our own laboratory, so we were using laboratories at the referral hospital. But with support from the public health, 2 years after we started the first trial, we were able to establish our on-site laboratory at CISPOC. Next slide. So today, 7 years after we have established our first lab, what we have is what you see here. We have 3 fully operational laboratories that are located at CISPOC headquarters. These labs, they respond for safety, cellular processing, and serology, and are GCLP compliant. We have a quality system implemented. We receive annual audits, and we actually are preparing our labs for accreditation. Next slide. The next pillar I will talk about is training and how the collaboration with the Public Health Agency helped in the training of our staff. So this collaboration with these 2 clinical trials supported the training of 3 young scientists in Mozambique, including myself. But can you click again, please? But what you see now is that from this initial training opportunity, other opportunities are raised. And at the moment, we have 2 more staff that are trained on, that have master's degrees. And we have 8 more that are under PhD or master's trainings, either in a local, national institution, or in an international institution, or university, as you can see by the logos on the bottom left side. So these are some of the institutions that are supporting the training of our staff at CISPOC and INS. Next slide. The next slide is about the last pillar, which is networking. And this is a very, very important pillar for the site growth and sustainability. The diagram that you see here shows how we evolved scientifically and the various collaborations that followed the initial collaboration with the Public Health Agency of Sweden. So we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for this initial support from the Public Health Agency of Sweden and from our colleagues in Sweden. And for that, we are very thankful to them. So through this initial collaboration, we had the opportunity to be exposed to many international institutions and to establish several North-South and South-South collaborations. The first 2 HIV vaccine trials that we have conducted at CISPOC, which were Tamovac 1 and 2 that you can see here in this diagram, brought international visibility and opportunity for us to be part of HVTN, which is the largest network on HIV vaccines, and in parallel to also strengthen our collaborations on TB research, which is now one of the main programs at the site. We also expanded our research portfolio from initially focused on HIV and HIV vaccines to now include other infectious diseases and emerging diseases such as human papillomavirus, Ebola, rotavirus, and very recently, we have started activities on health and environment. So I'm now coming to the end of my presentation, and I just want to leave here a few key points. Could you please go to the next slide? So the collaboration with the Public Health Agency of Sweden paved the way to the integration of INS and CISPOC in the largest international networks on HIV prevention and tuberculosis, which are in fact within the 5 major public health concerns in Mozambique. The scientists that were trained under this collaboration are now leaders in their respective areas in the country, and they are helping the country to find solutions for the major public health concerns. And finally, the conduct of a very high standard research, as well as the establishment of these GCLP compliant laboratories, were very key for insertion of CISPOC and INS in the world of health research, and have contributed for the development of research capacity in Mozambique. And I would like to thank you very much for your time And obrigada, it's how we say thank you in Portuguese.
Obrigada, Edna, then. This was a fantastic presentation, and it's great to hear about this collaboration between Sweden and Mozambique to strengthen the health system in Mozambique. So thank you so much for being at this webinar today and presenting your learnings. And thank you also to the internet connection that was very steady all through your presentation, even though it didn't allow for you to be on video. I want to remind you again, if you have any questions for the speakers, please go to menti.com and submit your questions. So far, I really want to thank all the speakers. We've had such interesting presentations from different sectors and from different perspectives. And now I have the pleasure of inviting 2 donors that are bravely and actively championing system strengthening funding. And we're going to have a conversation about the role of donors in system strengthening. So I would like to welcome Maria Bystedt, who is the strategy lead at the H&M Foundation. She has managed the partnership with WaterAid since the foundation's inception in 2013, and she drives the strategic direction of the foundation's social development programs, within which systems thinking is core. Also welcome to Elizabeth Montgomery from Sida. She is the Senior Policy Specialist for Employment and Market Development. And she has a lot of experience from system strengthening work, and especially in market development. And she is promoting the systems thinking very actively within Sida. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So first I want to hear from you. As donors of system strengthening, can you please share a little bit your thinking and the way that you work with this? Maria, would you like to go first, please?
Sure, thank you, Martina. H&M Foundation has always wanted to take a systems change mindset in how we work. And the SASWASH program, together with WaterAid, is a successful example of this. However, I would say that we have realized that we as a donor need to use our role better towards catalyzing systems change on a broad scale. So we have evaluated our work and asked ourselves how we can use our strengths and capabilities in the best way going forward. And I'd say the most important insight our work has given us so far is that we can't continue asking partners for siloed interventions. Social challenges don't exist in silos, they do exist in complex systems, and the solutions need to recognize that and need to be holistic. And systems change is also too complex for any actor to tackle alone. So it requires broad cross-sector collaborations. And if we want to reach the 2030 agenda, we need to stop looking for that old sort of best practice in silos and instead work in ecosystems to invent next practice together. Previously, we have funded bilateral projects with one partner organization focusing on one thematic area with clear, measurable results. That's been a very nice and safe way to work. Now that needs to change. We're transitioning into a much more innovative systems change approach, as we believe that change is best achieved when a diverse group of people join forces and commit to a common agenda to solve complex challenges. So we as a donor need to start asking the right questions. We need to fund differently, and we need to take an active part in facilitating cross-sector collaborations. We can enable those types of collaborations towards systems change basically by asking for that. And we're now testing how this can be done with a pilot in India, working with a method called collective impact. So we bring in a multitude of actors, and WaterAid is one of them, to apply a holistic approach to solving development challenges in the ecosystems where they exist. The thesis is that diverse actors that share a mutual goal can achieve more together than they could alone. It's not really that easy, it's quite complex, but we're eager to explore. So we prototype together, we try, we fail, learn, and try again until solutions with the power to make a difference in the world can be shared and scaled. And so to do that, we have commissioned an external evaluation to measure the impact, but also the actual method here to help us learn. And the findings will be transparently shared after 3 years of implementation. And the learnings will help us adjust and iterate for another 3 years in this particular project. And hopefully we can inspire others too as we go along. Thanks.
So that's so interesting. Thank you, Maria. And Elisabeth, Sida being perhaps a bigger donor, a governmental donor, what does it look like in Sida, and what are your thoughts around this?
Okay, thank you very much. No, so at Sida we talk about the systems approach more and more, I think, and as we heard here today, the systems thinking comes, in a larger package. Sida has a 3-year operational plan with different objectives on where we want to head the coming years. And one of these objectives is about contributing to innovative, locally owned solutions, to mobilize different actors and, have a multi-stakeholder partnership approach. And we also emphasize adaptive management and the catalytical role being very important. And I think the systems approach really embraces all that. And we have heard different examples here today from water and sanitation and health, democratic systems. And I think the system strengthening is relevant in all development areas. Now, in inclusive economic development, market development, where I work, there is a specific approach called the market systems development approach that has come out very strongly in our field and is now regarded as best practice among donors, and more implementers are applying it. So, and at Sida we have worked quite hard for 2 years now to institutionalize that approach, the market systems development approach, with the purpose to increase the use of it and improve existing programs. And I think we do that because we want our partners to have a holistic view. We heard a lot about that today. Holistic view on the development problem, to look at the whole system, to understand, which aspects of the system are not working for the poor. In the market systems development approach, the analysis of the system is really important, and I think we have heard a lot about that today as well. We encourage our partners to move away from, visible symptoms to like the underlying root causes, which is really about behaviors, business models, work practices, regulations, enabling conditions, and then, to address these system level constraints. And I think in this also, the facilitation mechanism is really important, the catalytical role, which really means that we want our partners to create incentives and build capacity of local actors, both public and private and others, so that they can bring about the change themselves. So we want our partners to facilitate change and have this catalytical role rather than, providing the solutions. So all of this might sound sort of obvious, but it's actually more difficult than it sounds, and I think it's where we're all heading now.
So what would you say, Elisabeth? What are the sort of main challenges that differ from sort of normal grant funding, but also perhaps what are the benefits of funding system strengthening?
But I think first of all, the benefits, of course, we want to achieve inclusive and large-scale impact. So, to reach more poor people and to achieve sustained change, results that last. And the system strengthening could promote that. But it's also about trying, as I said, new ways, exploring together with our partners what we could do better to achieve our goals, and about promoting innovative and locally owned solutions, being adaptive to a changing world. So those, I guess, are the benefits, and that's why we're doing it. But it has, of course, implications, both for the implementing partner and the donor. For example, if you look at the implications and the challenges, it means that I think we don't necessarily work directly with our target group. It's a more indirect approach, which is more difficult to explain, might be more intangible. What is systemic change? The attribution could be a challenge. Also, results could be a bit slower, but then hopefully larger in scale and longer lasting. And when you do an innovative and adaptive approach, what we have seen is that the programs have to be structured in a new way. They have to allow for flexibility, and that has implications for us as a donor, how we assess and follow up programs, but also, of course, with implementing partner. And as donor, we want to make sure that we have to make sure that our partner can apply this systems thinking, and that they can apply, adaptive management. And the partner also have to build more capacity and constantly develop their ways of working. But I think one really good thing is that what I've seen is that this type of approach really intensify the dialogue with our partner. We co-create and we learn together and together with other actors, and that really adds value.
Thank you so much, Elisabeth. Maria, you have been working a lot in H&M Foundation, thinking about the best way to do this. How do you work with partners, etc.? And you've had big workshops to think this really through. What would you say are the biggest challenges? And also, I think we want to hear the benefits of it.
I echo Elisabeth, really. Obviously, the biggest benefit is that system strengthening work addresses the core of a problem rather than the symptoms. And this is really the only way to create long-term positive change. And instead of directing a siloed intervention to solve a development challenge, you need to take on a holistic approach in the ecosystems where the target group exists. And you need to change, really, the systems around it. And in the concrete case of Saswash, this has literally meant that we have to ensure that our investments are not flushed down the drain. If you don't have inclusive, if you don't have systems that actually ensure that people, that the systems that you have invested in are maintenance, and that there are duty bearers and institutions that take responsibility for the operation, or for that matter, you have an awareness of your rights as a citizen, then that expensive infrastructure will eventually break down and be abandoned. So that has been a core here. And for challenges, so Marcus was using the metaphor of this is like a chessboard, and I think he's also earlier talked about it being very difficult to have roadmaps when you're working towards systems change. There are no roads where we're going. We're building the roads. So this is, of course, a huge challenge, and something that you need to be aware of. And to handle that, we do have reflections or must-haves to share from Saswash. And the first one really then is about adaptive management and learning that the report talks about. This is central to working with systems change. And I guess it's something that many donors so far have been hesitant to fund. And it requires flexibility within planning and reporting frameworks, as the whole idea is that it's not going to be possible to foresee the exact plan going forward. And I'd say as well, it's very important to have built up a relationship of transparency and trust. The donor has to be comfortable with the relative slow pace before concrete results can be seen. And the implementing partner has to be comfortable with reporting on learnings and so-called failures to the donor without worrying about negative consequences. And I say so-called failures because systems change work needs to accept failures on the road and instead see these as lessons learned and ways to help shape a successful way forward. So trust is paramount, and it's important that the donor chooses partners that they feel that they can trust. Therefore, I advise donors to really do a thorough due diligence before committing, and also to spend time, invest in building up a relationship where the grantee understands the importance of transparency and feels comfortable in sharing challenges and failures. So the donor has to make it clear that it is committed to the partnership as long as the transparency is there. So I'd say investing in a transparent relationship is really key.
Thank you, Maria. And I think this is really important point, because you need to sort of then transform this normal, perhaps, relationship of a donor and a grantee to become more of a partnership for development, which is something that we've talked a lot about for a long time, but perhaps when working with system strengthening, it really becomes very critical, and we need to bring in all the aspects needed around that. And it's, of course, for us as development partners and implementing partners, having those donors that can go in and say, you know, we trust you. We want to help support you in the work of strengthening these systems, and we're there to back you up. We're there to build this partnership, to do it jointly. I think is absolutely necessary, and to commit to that long-term perspective, saying we know that this takes time, but we believe in this type of development programs. I think that's excellent to hear that sort of understanding, both from Sida and H&M Foundation, because we as actors see that as so important. So thank you both for being such great champions on this. But of course, we want to see more donors that takes on this responsibility, is perhaps what we would say, the responsibility of really committing to long-term and to going beyond the normal development programs. So can you give us some kind of advice to other donors? What would you say if there are other donors watching this seminar thinking about, maybe this is something that we could fund? What can you say to them? Maria, would you like to go first?
Well, I would say that the time to act is now, because we're all aware that we're now in the decade of action, and this is an urgency that tells us it's time to find new ways of accelerating change needed to reach the SDGs. And silo busting is really key to achieving the SDGs. These 17 quite different goals are so interconnected, and there are synergies between each of them. So this we need to use. And if you focus on, I'm sort of repeating myself and focusing on silos here, but silos tend to work against synergies and suppress the multiplier effects that action in one area can have on other areas. And we as donors can really shift the needle, enable holistic systems change if we ask for that, really. Donors have the luxury, I think, can and should allow themselves to be innovative and dare to move outside of the box and dare to take a more long-term perspective. All of this will be needed to fast-track change. And let's face it, it is complex, and it will not show quick results. It's not easy to measure either, but we believe that in the long run, this will prove itself to be the most cost-efficient and impactful approach to improving lives, and our best bet, really, to reach the 2030 goals. Again, I think donors need to dare to do things differently and invest early in systems change, and we need to step up now.
Thank you, Maria. Elizabeth, any final words of advice or encouragement, maybe?
So I totally agree with Maria there. So the systems area is definitely here. You know, the systems approach is about doing good development cooperation, and I think it's a result of constantly learning and improving what we do. So the systems approach is a natural step now in development cooperation, and yes, we need to step up. But I also think, as a final word, that as donor, we need to think about what it means for us. It's not only about the implementing partner. We also have to shift our mindset and ways of doing things, you know, together with our partner. And I think at Sida, what we have seen when we tried this, we need to increase the knowledge internally and build our own capacity in this to understand it better and to promote it and encourage and with our partners, and to create, I think, a conducive environment, both internally, but also, of course, externally for this type of approach. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you for being such great donors to systems thinking and to actors working on this. It's been a pleasure having you with us to both deliver this seminar, but also be available to talk a little bit about this. Thank you so much. We're now going to invite the participants and the listeners to post your questions. So my colleague Hannah will help me to pick up the questions that we have received through menti.com. There's still a slight window of opportunity to enter your questions there, if you also have questions perhaps for Maria and Elizabeth. So Hannah, have we any interesting and exciting questions from the Menti website that you can share with us or post to the speakers?
Yes, we do, Martina. Thank you. We've got a question that's come in from Charlotta, and it was directed at me, but I can provide some answers, but I think my colleague Sida would be best placed. And so your question was that we mentioned the importance of analysis and planning to develop and design a good system strengthening program. But you're wondering how you work with key stakeholders in this part of the process. So it's a very good question. Obviously, we've talked a lot about participation and really having to understand the strengths of the WASH system. And one way we've been doing that in SUSWASH, in the SUSWASH program, is really to invite local stakeholders to workshop settings, often over a few days, to really go through a series of exercises and using analytical tools such as building block frameworks to facilitate discussions and to reach consensus about what the common problem is and identify where we might target our efforts as WaterAid to address those blockages within the WASH system. And stakeholders that have come to those sorts of workshop settings have been from the WASH sector, health sector, other sectors, to ensure that we are coherent in our identification of what the problems are, and ensure that we don't duplicate any efforts that might already be ongoing, and to really recognise where WaterAid's added value might be with regards to tackling some of those barriers that are highlighted in those workshop settings, and doing those workshop settings at both district level but also provincial level, and then bringing all those findings together to have a clearer picture of where we might intervene. But I might just bring in Caesar, because he has obviously done this process in practice in Kampala as part of SUSWASH. So Caesar, I don't know, do you want to respond as well?
Yeah, thank you very much, Hannah. I think you've ably responded to the question, but maybe to add is that we do not stop at the inception level in terms of engaging the stakeholders. So like we've been saying, we are using the adaptive programming approach for us to be able to, again, have these conversations ongoing with the rest of the stakeholders. So annually, but also now during the third year and into the fourth year of the SUSWASH program, we are doing it quarterly, where we invite different stakeholders and have conversations on how to improve the program delivery, but also learn from each other and also seize new opportunities that can improve the delivery of the program towards system strengthening. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Caesar. Yes, we also have another question. I'm not sure who this is from, but it's directed at Marcus. So we talk a lot about changing mindsets and behaviors, and also increasing or empowering people, particularly marginalized people, during system strengthening programs. But obviously these kind of interventions and efforts are quite difficult to measure, the changes that are brought about in mindsets and behaviors. So just wondered if you had any thoughts on how, as an agency, you go about doing that. That's quite a hard one.
Yeah, how many hours do we have for the? I mean, I think this gets to, in some sense, it gets to the heart of the challenge that we have, that we're trying to create physical structural changes, and at the same, and we can actually evaluate the extent to which we've built something new. But in particular with ICLD, we're also trying to create these more or support these more ephemeral changes that people do for themselves, a change in their sense of confidence that they can influence the conditions that they work in. And that only comes with experience tackling something and actually getting it done. So just a really quick example with this neighborhood organization I worked with from before, the community organizations often started with a campaign to do something like get a regular garbage pickup or a stop sign at a dangerous intersection. And in the grand scheme of things for this organization, which wanted to empower low-income people, those weren't very big, but those were the practice that enabled people to see that they could actually engage and have success. And to do several of those, people then begin to see, they begin to learn the tools, and they begin to see that they can actually do that, and they engage. And this organization had statewide and nationwide impacts on a variety of issues, but those neighborhood groups often started with really simple projects. So the trick is keeping an eye on both things at the same time, both the very tangible projects, which are important as learning tools, and also because they deliver results, and this more ephemeral change where people are learning how to engage and they're developing confidence that engaging makes a difference.
Great, thanks, Marcus. Yeah, I suppose it's looking at those very small changes within, people's actions and making a note of those. Thanks very much. We've got another question, and this one is directed maybe for Maria and Elizabeth, and it's basically saying that system change, as we've talked about, takes a long time. It takes a long time to bring about change and perhaps observe those changes. Do you see any role for direct service delivery, particularly when the needs are so great and the need is immediate? What are your thoughts on that? I know Caesar touched on it briefly as part of his presentation, but it would be great to hear your thoughts on that.
Sorry, Hannah, could you repeat? My network is playing up here.
Sure, yes. So the question is, system strengthening, as we've talked about, takes a long time, and the results take a long time to be seen and observed. Do you see any role for direct service delivery, particularly in areas where the need is so great, or the demand is now?
I think to be successful in working with that kind of long-term perspective, you need to also make sure that you have parts and components of the project that delivers on the direct needs that there are. So there has to be a balance here, and it would be very I think uninspiring for all actors if you're just constantly working towards a goal that is 6 years ahead. Better than to make sure that you can also have those small sort of quick wins part of the product program.
If I can add there, so maybe the question is also about like where you have a situation, maybe like for us working with economic development, where you have very thin markets, very few actors, let's say private actors, where you have even a humanitarian-like situation, and I mean it could be long scale with everything in between there. And of course, we want things to be more catalytic and address systemic change. But then in some cases, you have to be more direct. You have to do more, subsidies and handouts, etc. I think the most important thing is to understand, like that our partner understand where on this scale they actually are, and that they have a very deliberate strategy on like why they're doing things. So if they're doing more direct delivery, they have to understand that they're doing it and what it is doing with the system, and that they have a more long-term vision to eventually be more, be more hands-off and catalytical and hand over things to the local actors. So you usually have to have a mix and to have a deliberate strategy on why you're doing things, I think.
Great, thank you both. I would agree, it's being, as you say, deliberate and backing up whatever you do with a detailed analysis of why you're doing certain things. So thank you. We've got one question for Edna that's come in, and that's about, let me just grab it here. Has anything gone wrong or not as planned during the work that you've done? Obviously, we've talked a lot about how system strengthening, system change requires adaptation in the work that you do. So just a question about whether anything's gone wrong or not to plan, and how did you adapt to that?
Thank you, Hannah. Well, you know, on the world of research, I think overall things have worked very well over the last years, but there are always hiccups, and the biggest issue is, and this is a challenge for the country, is how you start developing your own projects, and how you start running you start getting your own funding for your research activities with your own research ideas. I think that is definitely the main challenge now, to maintain a site like what we have. You do need to have a lot of support, and you do need to create you know, capacity in your investigators and your researchers. You need to train them so that they are able to continue the work, you know, more or less independent. And I think this is the main challenge at the moment, is to, since most of our staff is very young, they're still being trained. So we do rely a lot on external support to perform our activities. This is definitely a challenge when you're working on research environment. So what we're doing now is really to, as you could see, we're training as much as we can local scientists, so they can move on with their own legs, and they can have their own research ideas, taking into account the research agenda in the country, and they can continue to support research activities in country without you know, the 100% need of external support. So I think the main challenge is really on the finance part, and really training, having the opportunity to have trained staff that are able to continue the work. So this is what we're doing. We are preparing our researchers, our scientists locally, so that they are capable of overcoming this challenge. Overall, the rest of the progression of research in the countries has been very smooth, but we are now coming into a situation that we definitely need to start, you know, walking by ourselves and defining our the priorities for the sites, for the country, and getting there, being the investigators to bring in funding and research ideas. I think this is where we are at the moment.
Great, thanks so much, Edna. I think we have time for one more question, although the question is a fantastic question, which we could talk for hours on, but I think maybe we'll go for it and see who would like to respond. So the question is, we talked a lot about how the role of government is critical, and strong government leadership is critical to the achievement of strong WASH systems. But what happens, what are the solutions if the government of the country that you're working in is corrupt or dictatorial, or particularly in conflict situations? So that's a fantastic question, and yeah, it's hugely challenging. Maybe I can just start the response and then open it to others. one way we're doing this in SUSWASH, and one thing that I think many people do when they're working on system strengthening, is really trying to clarify the roles and responsibilities of who is responsible for doing what when it comes to WASH service delivery. Because when there is fragmentation or confusion about who is responsible, then that opens opportunities for corruption and get wiggling out of your responsibility, as it were. So that's one thing that within SUSWASH we're trying to do, as well as increasing access to information, increasing transparency within the system, and also trying to identify champions within the system who are natural champions within government who advocate for what you're working on. I know Sida has been working on this a lot. I don't know if Sida, you wanted to come in and provide a response, or any Marcus or Stefan or Edna. Sida, I know you've been working on financing side.
Thank you very much, Hannah. So in SUSWASH, one of the things that we recognize is that as civil society, as non-state actors, we can never replace government, regardless of all the challenges that have been raised in this question, corruption and so on and so forth. So in all the work that we do, we want them to have the driving seat, but also we work on the demand side to empower citizens with information. And I can give an example around budgeting. So one of the things we've shared with the local structures, the citizen groups, is their right to accessing information. And in our legislation in Uganda, we have a law to that, the Access to Information Act. So most of these local structures didn't know about all these. And corruption, for instance, happens at different levels of government because government is such a bureaucratic institution. So while they get to know that they have that empowerment and right to ask for information, go to health facilities, to public schools, and ask where budgets are being spent on WASH, and also going to local governments where by law they are mandated to put information around budget on boards for citizens and the general public to be able to access this information. So all those loopholes in terms of engagement are the ones that we try to explore and be able to see that we reduce value for money. And in terms of financing, again, questions come up around corruption, where resources are allocated, how can WASH be funded, how can we see increased financing for water, sanitation, and hygiene in a corrupt government. And we are seeing that whenever we used to have all these engagements for stakeholders from different sectors, water, health, education, every sector wants an increment in the budget. So how do you take to government, and water you want an increment, and you're quoting all kinds of declaration where governments have committed to increase budget allocations. The health will quote Maputo declaration that health sector needs to increase the budget. Water and sanitation, we've been quoting the SWA and the Ngol declaration. So government becomes confused. And one of the things we've said and agreed as civil society is that how do we work even within the limited resources and ensure value for money? So we've been analyzing budget lines, the nitty-gritties of those allocations to water and sanitation, and present them to Parliament. And we've opened eyes of members of Parliament to be able to go into the details to assess how is even the limited financing to the WASH sector, how is it put to better use, before even we go into increasing financing, because there's a lot of leakage even with the small funds that are already available. Thank you.
Thanks, Caesar. That's a great response, and I'm sorry we're at the end of our time for questions. I know we would all have things to say on that one, but I'll hand back over to Martina.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for picking up and facilitating the questions. And for those of you who didn't get your question answered, we're really sorry about that. But feel free to email our speakers directly with your questions. And we're now coming to the end of this webinar, and we will end it like we started it, with some wise words from Stefan Swartling Petersson. So I will warmly hand back the word to you, Stefan, and if you please want to share with us a little bit your key takeaways from
Thanks.
this session.
What a challenge, Martina. You're really putting me up to failure. Wise words.
Yes,
let's
please.
settle for some words. You know, I must say, I've listened with great interest, and it's very similar to the discussions we have in the health field. We talk about accountability, we talk about how we can have a long view, and all of these things. Wherever you've said wash, we could have said health. The problem I have when I challenge myself is that that's all and well when you're together with the converted. And we on this seminar here, we are the converted and we believe in this. But how do we communicate this externally? Whether it's actually going back to reporting in the Hennes and Mauritz store how you spent your money, whether it's reporting back to the taxpayers, whether it's actually convincing the women in Kampala that this is a worthwhile thing to do, and the school children and the men and the decision makers, etc. I think we've touched on some of these things. We need to have some quick gains, and we need to have the long-term vision at the same time, and I appreciate that very much. But I like stories and anecdotes. My friend who worked with us and was converted in UNICEF on strengthening supply chains for medicine so that the drugs don't run out. He went from the New York office, where we spoke the same language, to work in Copenhagen in the big warehouse and the big supply division of UNICEF. And he said, well, I'm here to do system strengthening of supply chains. And then they looked at him and said, that's nice. Okay. And now you've had the workshops. How many more workshops shall you have before you're done strengthening the system? And so what he ended up doing was actually setting up a maturity model, saying, okay, this is a self-assessment, it's a bit crude, but our supply system in this country now is at levels 2. And my goal for the year is that we go to level 3. And maybe 2 years from now, we will have reached level 5, etc. To try to concretize, in that case, to his colleagues, who were also sort of good-hearted. But then we also need the very effective communication, I think, and communication people to report back to taxpayers and donors and to the recipients that we're actually doing something. And if you're a politician and you go for this and you work with Caesar in Kampala, how do you get re-elected on this? I mean, it's all and well to have Caesar talk about health system strengthening, but we need a few quick gains. We need to communicate what we believe is right now. So that's my main challenge. I've loved what I've heard. I think there are many synergies. I think there are things we can learn across health and WASH. I've certainly learned stuff today. But the main thing I take home is to work on the external communication. To my dear grandmother, whom I always think of, how could I explain what I'm doing to my grandmother, and to all of those other people that we talk about who are stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. So, and I'm really happy to hear that you have learned something. And I think perhaps before ending this webinar, in the spirit of system strengthening, we should all pause, reflect, and think about what we've learned. Perhaps you've learned that system strengthening is something that you want to work with or you want to bring forward in your organization, because we believe that it's fundamental for sustainable and inclusive societal change. And we believe that we as development partners can contribute to that. But like you said, we need the partners and the agencies and the donors to commit long term and to really go beyond that traditional development approach where we just focus on service delivery or do ad hoc capacity training, but rather take the whole systems perspective. And where we are still people focused, even if our solutions might be technical, and that we continue to learn, but then also do something with that learning, that we actually take action on that learning, that we adapt, that we show that we can be flexible. Because like Marcus told us, it's a chessboard, right? The system is a chessboard. So whenever we move our pieces, the setting changes and we don't know what the move is going to be from the other end. So we need to keep that adaptive mentality. So I really encourage you to continue this reflection in your organizations, to think about what have you learned is there something that you can adapt? Or is there another pathway that will make your journey to societal change more effective? And finally, of course, we want to encourage you to read the WaterAid learning report from our system strengthening program, and just get in touch with us if you want to learn more about that or have discussions further on how we can work together. So I want to thank all the speakers. I want to thank Cesar, Hannah, Stefan, Edna, Marcus, Elizabeth, and Maria. And a big thanks to Sida and H&M Foundation for doing this webinar with us. And thank you to you at home who have listened and participated with your excellent questions. And that's it from us. Thank you so much, and bye.